John Parker sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, the summer sun casting harsh shadows over the cracked asphalt of the sleepy southern highway. His eyes caught the sleek black sedan slipping smoothly along the roadside. A Lexus, tinted windows hiding the driver from plain sight. Yet, it wasn't the luxury car that stirred something uneasy within him. It was the figure behind the wheel. A black woman sitting tall, exuding a quiet strength that did not fit the image John had in his mind of someone like her driving down this road. The thought was a poison, a whisper of suspicion rooted deep in old stories and long-held biases, barely noticed yet shaping his every reaction. He flicked the siren on, sharp and jarring, demanding the car to pull over. Lisa Grant did not hesitate. She eased her car to the shoulder as if this moment had already played out countless times in her mind. John's footsteps hit the pavement with a slow, deliberate rhythm, the sound of authority marching in. His hand hovered near his holster, a silent threat wrapped in ritual. The heat pressed down, thick and unforgiving, mixing with the cold edge of his gaze as he approached the driver's window. Lisa did not flinch. She met his eyes steadily, the years of discipline and hardship in far-off deserts and war zones reflecting in her calm demeanor. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her purse, pulling out her wallet, and handed over her license and registration without a word. John scanned the documents. The name Lisa Grant and the rank listed beneath barely registered with him. Instead, his mind spun questions heavy with suspicion, laced with the bitterness of unspoken prejudices. Do you actually have a real driver's license? Or did you borrow it just to show off? He hissed, teeth clenched, eyes narrowing. The words cut through the air like a whip. Sharp and unfair, Lisa's face remained still. No anger, no tears, just a quiet, resolute silence. That silence, unyielding, unmoving, was the fiercest weapon she carried. It spoke volumes more than any shouted protest ever could. John took a step back, squinting in the blinding sunlight. His mind fought the undeniable truth that the woman before him was unlike anyone he expected. She had faced dangers he could only imagine, commanding soldiers through life-or-death missions. Yet here she was, being reduced to suspicion, judged not by her character, but by the color of her skin. Inside Lisa, a storm raged silently. The memories of injustice, the countless stops, the questioning of her identity and worth, they all flooded back. Yet, she held fast, not out of weakness, but out of a profound strength forged in fire and loss. She had learned long ago that sometimes the fiercest battles were not fought with guns or commands, but with dignity and unwavering resolve. The road around them stretched endlessly, lined with faded signs and the quiet hum of a world that often turned a blind eye. But in this small moment, two lives collided, one shaped by fear and prejudice, the other by courage and grace. John's voice cracked as he demanded, "What do you do?" Not as a question, but a challenge. Lisa's eyes met his, unblinking, unbroken. She said nothing, because sometimes silence is louder than any accusation. I end that charged silence. The weight of history pressed down. The unspoken truth was clear. This was more than a traffic stop. It was a reckoning, and neither of them would ever be the same again. John Parker's eyes narrowed further as he stood beside the Lexus, the sun beating down relentlessly on the asphalt. His grip tightened on the edge of Lisa Grant's window, not quite touching but heavy with unspoken menace. His voice dropped low, edged with impatience and simmering suspicion. License and registration now. And don't think I'm asking because you're just another driver. I'm asking because I'm not convinced you belong on this road." Lisa's fingers remained steady as she handed over the documents. Not a flicker of fear, no tremble of hesitation. Her gaze was steady, unyielding, like a soldier holding her ground amidst a storm. The silence between them stretched taut, thick with tension. As if the very air had thickened, John cocked his head, the faintest smirk playing on his lips, a predator savoring the hunt. "What do you do for a living? Why are you driving this car here? This isn't a road for people like you." His tone was sharp, cruelly laced with condescension. Lisa's lips remained pressed together. She did not answer. Her silence was deliberate, a refusal to dignify the insult with a response. The weight of that silence unsettled John more than any words could. Challenged him. It forced him to confront something he'd long buried beneath layers of authority and prejudice. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching over her, an attempt to dominate. "Are you deaf? Or do you just think you're above the law?" His voice hardened into a growl, fingers tapping his flashlight with mounting frustration. Lisa lifted her eyes slowly, meeting his with a calm so fierce it made the hairs on John's neck rise. She breathed evenly, her posture immaculate. No apology, no defensiveness, just an unshakable calm that spoke of battles far beyond this road. Beyond this moment, John's facade cracked slightly. His carefully constructed armor of control began to show fractures. His gaze flickered down to the rank insignia she wore on her jacket, barely visible beneath the folds, but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. He swallowed hard, but his pride would not let him back down. "You're making me uncomfortable," he spat out. "You understand that? I don't ask questions because I'm curious. I ask because I have doubts. Doubts that you belong here." The silence was oppressive now. Lisa said nothing, but the weight of her presence was a response far louder than any shouted word. It pressed against John's chest, constricting, reminding him that this was not a man he could bully into submission. His hand twitched near his holster, a reflex born of years of trying to control situations that felt out of hand. He struggled to maintain his authority, but the calm defiance before him was an unfamiliar opponent. "You need to remember," he hissed through clenched teeth. "On this road, I decide who moves forward. And today, I'm not sure you have a good enough reason." Lisa's eyes narrowed just a fraction. A subtle shift that went unnoticed by many, but it was a spark, a quiet assertion of strength that told John, without words, she was not intimidated. She was not just anyone. She was a force he could neither cage nor command. For a moment, time seemed to hang suspended. The distant hum of passing cars faded. The world narrowed to the tense standoff between two wills, one wielding power built on prejudice and fear, the other anchored in unbreakable resolve. John's voice lowered even more, a dangerous edge creeping in. "Explain yourself. Now." Lisa inhaled deeply, steady and deliberate, but still she said nothing. The silence was louder than thunder, and in that silence, John realized this was no ordinary traffic stop. This was a reckoning. Lisa Grant's eyes held John Parker like a mirror reflecting everything he tried to hide. The fear, the doubt, the wavering certainty beneath his hardened exterior. She stood unmoved, a pillar of calm in the storm of his mounting frustration. His confident posture began to falter, his voice growing quieter though no less urgent. For a long moment, he said nothing, caught in the silent battle of wills. Then, with a breath that trembled just slightly, John pulled out his radio. His fingers fumbled, betraying the tension he refused to admit. "Dispatch, I need backup," he said, voice strained, eyes darting toward Lisa again as if seeking an escape from the gaze that pinned him down. Lisa watched him with a quiet sadness. This was not the first time a man like John had tried to assert control, to drown out the truth with force. But in her silence, in the steadiness of her presence, there was a power far stronger than any gun or badge, the power of unwavering dignity. John's call crackled through the radio, a desperate attempt to reclaim the footing slipping beneath him. He paced the asphalt, the weight of the sun pressing down, and yet it was the weight inside him, the weight of being seen, that felt heaviest. Lisa's thoughts drifted for a moment, memories of battlefields where lives depended on clarity, courage, and the unspoken trust between soldiers. She had faced bullets, bombs, and chaos, yet nothing was as piercing as this moment, when she was judged not for her service or sacrifice, but for the color of her skin. John's shadow stretched across the ground as he returned to her window. His jaw clenched, fingers twitching near his belt, but his eyes betrayed a new uncertainty. "You're making me uncomfortable," he muttered, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. Lisa met his gaze, not with anger, but with a quiet strength that shook him to his core. She saw the man beneath the uniform, the man fighting his own ghosts, his own fears wrapped in the armor of authority. Minutes felt like hours. The distant wail of another patrol car grew louder, signaling the arrival of backup. But Lisa stood alone in that moment, a solitary figure embodying a truth too often ignored. John's breath hitched. The veneer of control cracked, revealing vulnerability. He had called for help not because he was threatened by Lisa, but because her steadfastness threatened the very foundation of his world, a world built on assumptions, on power wielded without conscience. Lisa didn't flinch when the second officer approached. She didn't raise her voice or plead. Instead, she extended her hand calmly, asking only for what was rightfully hers, the return of her documents. John hesitated, then slowly withdrew the papers, handing them over as if passing a fragile relic. His eyes flickered away, unwilling to meet hers, as if acknowledging defeat was the hardest command he'd ever been given. The silence between them was filled with unsaid words, apologies never voiced, regrets never spoken, and a recognition that justice had, for once, found its quiet champion. As Lisa slid back behind the wheel, the sun caught the small glint of her metal pinned beneath her jacket, a symbol of honor, resilience, and sacrifice. John watched the Lexus merge back into the road, the hum of the engine a soft reminder that some battles were fought not with noise, but with stillness. Tears welled unbidden in the corners of John's eyes, tears not of weakness, but of the weight of reckoning. In that moment, he saw beyond his own fears and prejudices, glimpsing a world where courage did not roar, but stood steady, unwavering. And for the first time, he felt the trembling beneath the badge, the fragile crack in a system that had long refused to see. The road stretched ahead, vast and uncertain. But Lisa Grant had already walked through the storm, and John Parker would never forget the look in her eyes. The distant rumble of tires grew louder on the hot asphalt, breaking the heavy silence that had settled between John Parker and Lisa Grant. Officer Michael Reed pulled his cruiser to the side, the afternoon sun glinting off the badge pinned to his chest, a symbol he once believed in without question. Today, though, something deep inside him churned uneasily. Michael stepped out, eyes immediately locking onto the tense scene. John stood rigid, voice sharp and clipped, but there was a flicker of something Michael couldn't ignore: uncertainty. Lisa sat composed in the driver's seat, calm and unwavering, her gaze steady as steel. As Michael approached, his boots thudded lightly, but his heart pounded heavily. He had been trained to uphold the law, to respect authority, but what he witnessed now stirred a conflict he hadn't anticipated. John's questions, laced with suspicion and veiled threats, felt less like justice and more like a personal vendetta masked in power. "Everything all right here?" Michael asked, voice polite but probing. John's eyes flicked toward him, a tight smile forced onto his lips. "Just making sure this driver belongs on this road," he replied, but his tone lacked conviction. Lisa didn't answer. She looked at Michael briefly, and in that silent exchange, Michael sensed a truth John refused to face. The air thickened with tension, and Michael's mind raced through every lesson drilled into him at the academy. Yet, none spoke of confronting a fellow officer, especially one so visibly struggling to maintain control. John's impatience cracked the moment. "I asked her questions," he said, voice low but defensive. "She's making me uncomfortable, and I have every right to find out why she's here." Michael's gaze shifted to Lisa, then back to John. Something didn't sit right. The man's posture was rigid with fear, masked poorly as authority. The questions were invasive, unnecessary, and Lisa, quiet, dignified, held herself with a grace that belied the danger John claimed to see. The silence hung heavy. Michael's fingers curled slightly at his side, an instinct to intervene battling with ingrained loyalty. He knew what his oath demanded, but he also knew when that oath was being twisted. John's hand hovered near his holster as he barked, "You're new here, Reed. You don't understand how things work. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to keep the peace." Michael swallowed hard. "Bending the rules doesn't mean breaking them," he said quietly, surprising even himself. "And making someone uncomfortable isn't justification for harassment." John's face flushed, eyes flashing with anger. "Watch your mouth, rookie. This isn't a debate." But Michael stood firm. The truth simmered between them like a live wire. For the first time, he felt the old system crack beneath his feet, the foundation of unquestioned obedience shifting. Lisa's eyes met Michael's. A silent plea for justice, for someone to see beyond the badge, beyond the uniform. The second officer's voice was steady, but inside, a war raged. Loyalty versus morality. Fear versus courage. Tradition versus change. John's grip tightened, his breath quickening. But the arrival of Michael was a turning point. The old guard met the new, and for the first time, the new questioned everything. Michael reached for his radio, not to call backup, but to signal that this stop needed scrutiny, that justice wasn't about power, but truth. In that moment, the tension snapped like a frayed rope. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Michael Reed would no longer stand silent. Michael Reed's hand trembled slightly as he pulled a small, worn leather wallet from his pocket. The afternoon sun caught the edges of a crisp, embossed card, military identification. He stepped closer to John Parker, eyes locked on the older officer's face, watching for any sign of recognition or hesitation. "John," Michael said, voice steady but heavy with meaning, "you need to see this." John's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What is it, rookie?" Michael flipped open the wallet, revealing the card bearing the name Lisa Grant, Major, United States Army. The rank insignia gleamed quietly in the light, alongside official seals and credentials that left no room for doubt. He held the card firmly, letting the weight of it fill the space between them. Lisa sat silently, watching the exchange with unwavering calm, the years of hardship and sacrifice etched in every line of her face. This was more than an ID. It was a testament, proof of a life dedicated to service, to courage, to honor. John's breath hitched, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, searching for a response. His hands, once so confident, now fidgeted nervously at his sides. The authority he had wielded like a weapon suddenly felt brittle, exposed. "Military identification," Michael continued, voice low but firm. "She has every legal right to be here, and you have no basis for your suspicions." John's eyes darted to Lisa's face, then back to the card in Michael's hand. The badge, the uniform, all the unspoken respect they demanded, stood in stark contrast to the assumptions that had driven his actions. He swallowed hard, the realization crashing down like a tidal wave. "No, that can't be," John muttered, shaking his head as if trying to dislodge the truth. I didn't know." Michael's gaze sharpened. "Maybe, but your ignorance doesn't excuse your behavior. You questioned her identity, her right to be on this road, based solely on prejudice." The silence that followed was suffocating. John's shoulders slumped, the weight of his actions settling deep. The years of rigid authority, the unchecked biases, all crumbled beneath the undeniable proof before him. Lisa's voice, quiet but resolute, broke the silence. "You see me now," she said. "Not as a threat, but as a person. Not as a stereotype, but as someone who has earned her place." John's eyes filled with a mix of shame and something else, a glimmer of regret. His breath trembled, words failing him as the gap between who he was and who he needed to be yawned wide. Michael stepped back, the tension finally easing, though the wound remained raw. "This isn't just about one stop, John. It's about how we treat each other, how we see each other." John nodded slowly, the facade of invincibility shattered. For the first time, he felt small, not powerless, but humbled. Lisa reached out, taking back her credentials, her hands steady and sure. "I've faced more danger than this," she said softly. "But the battle for respect and justice is the hardest fight of all." John swallowed once more, struggling to meet her eyes. I'm sorry," he whispered, the words heavy with the weight of a lifetime's unspoken truths. In that moment, the road outside seemed to hold its breath. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. Shadows of the past, and the fragile hope of change. The evidence was irrefutable. The truth, undeniable. And John Parker knew there was no turning back. Inside the sleek black Lexus, a quiet sentinel stood watch, an unblinking guardian hidden in plain sight. The car's cameras, seamlessly integrated and nearly invisible, recorded every moment with meticulous precision. Not just the exterior scene, but the interior too. The soft rustle of papers, the shallow breaths, the subtle shift in tension that no human eye could fully capture. This was no ordinary dashcam. It was a fortress of data, encrypted, tamper-proof, a digital witness immune to the distortions of memory or manipulation. Every second, every sound, every glance was etched into a secure cloud, far beyond the reach of those who might seek to rewrite the story. Lisa Grant knew this. The knowledge settled deep within her, a quiet reassurance amidst the chaos. She reached out calmly, fingers brushing the ignition. The engine hummed to life, a soft purr that cut through the thick silence like a measured heartbeat. Outside, Officer John Parker lingered, the weight of truth pressing against him like a storm about to break. His usual bluster drained away, replaced by a fragile shell of uncertainty. The system, cold, impartial, relentless, had exposed the cracks in his authority. Lisa glanced once more at the two officers standing by the roadside, their faces etched with conflicting emotions. There was no need for final words. No sirens blared, no commands shouted. The unlawful power that had tried to bend reality in John's favor was quietly, irrevocably pushed back. As the Lexus rolled forward, its mirrored windows reflecting a world unwilling to change, Lisa's mind drifted to the invisible war playing out beyond this moment. Technology, once feared as a tool of control, had become an unlikely ally. A weapon wielded not by fists or badges, but by truth. Unassailable, unalterable. John's gaze followed the car's retreating taillights, a flicker of something raw and unfamiliar breaking through the fog of his conditioned responses. He felt watched, seen, not by his colleagues or superiors, but by a system that demanded accountability, that refused to be swayed by excuses or fear. The psychological grip he had held over so many faded, replaced by a cold realization. The era of unchecked power was ending. The very uniform that once shielded him now magnified his failings. Lisa sat upright, the subtle tightening of her jaw betraying a flicker of resolve. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a slow, deliberate unraveling of the structures built on silence and suppression. She reached into her purse, fingers brushing against a small device. A remote that activated the secure upload of the entire encounter to a cloud server layered with 3 levels of encryption, guarded by proxies designed to repel intrusion. Once authenticated, the footage would self-destruct in 120 seconds if not confirmed. A safeguard ensuring the integrity of the record. No one could alter what was captured here. No distorted report, no whispered rumor could erase the reality frozen in time. Behind her calm exterior, Lisa felt a surge of quiet power. This was justice, not loud, not violent, but inevitable. As the Lexus merged onto the highway, the world seemed to hold its breath. A shadow passed over John Parker's face, the shadow of a system shifting beneath him, of a truth too potent to deny. That in that silent moment, a message echoed. The eyes that watch now do not blink, and the truth, once recorded, never forgets. The aftermath was quieter than anyone expected. John Parker sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the weight of invisible chains pressing down on him. The badge that once gleamed proudly on his chest now felt like a shackle, a constant reminder of what he had lost, even if no one had said it aloud. No public statement, no fanfare, just silence. Within the police force, whispers filled the halls like a ghostly wind, but no one spoke openly. John was still there, in the rolls, in the reports, but he was a shadow, a relic slowly fading into obscurity. Assignments stopped coming, calls went unanswered, and colleagues who once nodded in greeting now avoided his gaze, as if acknowledging his presence might dredge up uncomfortable truths. That it was a punishment wrapped in invisibility, more isolating than any formal reprimand could be. Meanwhile, Officer Michael Reed walked a different path. The encounter with Lisa Grant had shattered something deep inside him. The old guard, the system John represented, was crumbling, its foundations rotted by years of unchecked prejudice and fear. Michael felt the fractures spreading, not just around him, but within him. The uniform he wore was no longer a symbol of unquestioned authority. It was a call to conscience. He began speaking quietly with trusted colleagues, planting seeds of change, sharing what he had witnessed, and questioning the practices that had long been accepted without thought. His voice was cautious at first, wary of retaliation, but it grew stronger with each conversation. The tension within the force thickened, an unspoken battle between those clinging to the old ways and those awakening to a new dawn of accountability and respect. Michael's resolve solidified into action. He joined forces with internal ethics committees, advocated for transparency, and pushed for training programs that emphasized empathy and justice over intimidation and control. The corridors of power, once impermeable, began to tremble. Back in the shadows, John Parker grappled with a different reality. The silence from his peers was deafening. The system he had served so blindly now treated him like a foreign object, unwanted, exposed. His reflection in the mirror became a stranger's face, eyes shadowed with regret and confusion. The man who once believed in rigid rules now faced the hollow shell of a broken legacy. John's isolation was punctuated by moments of sharp clarity, flashes of Lisa's calm gaze, Michael's steady voice challenging the status quo. They haunted him, reminders that power wielded without conscience was fleeting. In quiet moments, John wondered if redemption was possible, or if the system's walls were too thick, its scars too deep. Michael, sensing the urgency of the moment, understood that change was no longer optional, it was imperative. The old generation's collapse was not a failure, but an opportunity to rebuild. That he spoke at forums, penned thoughtful critiques, and mentored younger officers who yearned for a better path. The police force, long seen as monolithic and unyielding, was slowly awakening to its own reflection, messy, flawed, but capable of growth. Yet, the road ahead was treacherous. Resistance lingered in hushed conversations, and the ghosts of past abuses clung stubbornly. Michael knew the fight was far from over, but with each step, the tide shifted, and somewhere, in the quiet corners of the city, John Parker faced the cold truth. The world was moving on with or without him. The once unassailable system had been pierced by truth, and nothing would ever be the same. The story of Lisa Grant did not fade into the shadows as many expected. Instead, it exploded across the digital world, carried by countless voices hungry for justice and change. Social media platforms buzzed with the tale, the silent strength of a woman who refused to scream, yet whose quiet dignity roared louder than any protest. Within hours, clips of the encounter circulated widely. The calm steadiness of Lisa's gaze, the faltering authority of John Parker, the young officer Michael Reed's awakening. Hashtags like #TheLisaEffect and #SilentStrength trended, flooding timelines with messages of hope, resilience, and defiance. People from all walks of life, soldiers, activists, everyday citizens, saw in Lisa a symbol, not just of one traffic stop, but of a movement, a movement rooted in the power of silence that speaks volumes, in resistance that does not need to shout to shake the foundations of oppression. The Lisa Effect became more than a hashtag. It became a narrative reshaping conversations about power, race, and justice. Videos were dissected and analyzed, essays written and shared, podcasts dedicated to unpacking the layers of meaning behind a woman's refusal to be diminished. What surprised many was how a single act of composed resistance rippled outwards, inspiring others to reflect, to question the systems they lived under, and to find courage in their own quiet moments of defiance. The impact wasn't limited to social media. Community groups organized vigils, workshops, and forums to discuss systemic change. Police departments across the country felt the tremors, facing renewed calls for transparency, accountability, and reform. But the Lisa Effect was not just about external change. It awakened something inside those who had long felt powerless. A reminder that silence is not always submission, and that dignity can be a weapon sharper than any scream. Amid the flood of support, there were attempts to diminish the story, to twist it, to question Lisa's motives or paint her as an outlier. But the core message endured. The evidence was clear, the testimony undeniable. The quiet courage of one woman challenged an entire system built on loud intimidation. Across the nation, people shared their own stories, moments when they stood firm, when they refused to be erased, when they chose dignity over fear. The Lisa Effect became a beacon, shining light into dark corners where injustice had thrived unseen. Even those within law enforcement who had long struggled with the weight of history found strength in the narrative. Officers like Michael Reed emerged as voices for change, emboldened by the knowledge that integrity could prevail. The effect spread beyond borders, echoing in movements worldwide. In classrooms, boardrooms, and homes, the story sparked dialogue about prejudice, power, and the possibilities born from resilience. In the midst of the digital noise, one simple truth stood clear. Sometimes, the loudest revolution is carried on the quietest breath. The Lisa Effect reminded the world that silence, when wielded with purpose, can shatter walls built over centuries. And as millions watched, shared, and stood together, a new chapter began. One where justice was not demanded through anger alone, but through the enduring strength of those who dared to stand firm without saying a word. The world had witnessed the power of silence, and it would never be the same again. The echo of Lisa Grant's silent strength reached far beyond the streets, beyond the screens and hashtags, straight into the halls of power. The nation watched, hearts heavy with the weight of old wounds and hopes for something better. Calls for change swelled, not as fleeting whispers, but as a roaring tide that could not be ignored. Lawmakers, once distant and detached, found themselves facing the undeniable truth. A system that allowed unchecked authority to silence voices like Lisa's was a system on the brink of collapse. Under mounting social pressure, hearings were convened. Stories poured in from veterans, service members, and civilians alike. Tales of encounters marred by prejudice and power misused. And then the bill was introduced. A law granting military personnel, those who had pledged their lives to protect the nation, the explicit right to confront police officers during unlawful stops without fear of retaliation or dismissal. No longer would silence be forced by threat. No longer would dignity be a fragile hope in the shadow of injustice. When the bill passed, it was more than legislation. It was a testament, a national acknowledgement of the sacrifices made by individuals like Lisa Grant, and a promise that their truth would be honored. News outlets broadcast the moment with reverence, the words resonating like a balm to the weary. Lisa became more than a name. she became a symbol. Not because she shouted the loudest or fought the hardest in the streets, but because she stood unwavering in the face of fear. Her silence spoke volumes, echoing through the hearts of those who had felt invisible, unheard, unseen. Communities gathered to honor her courage. Candlelight vigils, silent marches, moments of quiet reflection. Tears fell freely, not just for the injustice endured, but for the hope rekindled. Mothers held their children closer, veterans clasped hands in solidarity. Strangers shared stories that had long been buried. Lisa herself remained humble, a quiet force. She understood that her battle was not hers alone. It belonged to every soul yearning for justice. Her silence had been her armor and her weapon, a refusal to be defined by hate, a declaration that truth, in its purest form, needs no defense. That in a small ceremony, she was invited to speak. Her voice, soft yet unwavering, filled the room. Justice is not the loudest voice in the room. It is the steadfast heart that beats beneath the noise. It is the courage to stand when standing means standing alone. This law is not just about rights. It is about recognition, respect, and the dignity every person deserves. Her words struck deep. They were carried beyond the chamber walls, into homes and hearts, a reminder that change is born from quiet conviction as much as from fiery protest. Yet, tears came not just from celebration, but from the memories her story stirred, of those who had not survived the fight for justice, of voices forever silenced. The pain was real, the journey long, but the path was now illuminated. Lisa's legacy was etched not in grand speeches or dramatic acts, but in the simple, profound power of truth lived quietly, boldly, and unapologetically. And as the sun set on a nation beginning to heal, the world saw, in her steadfast gaze and calm resolve, the enduring light of justice, proving that sometimes silence is the loudest cry for change. The tears shed were not just for the past, but for the promise of a future, where truth and dignity would prevail. And in that promise, Lisa Grant stood tall, a symbol for all who dare to stand in silence and be heard. John Parker's presence within the force grew increasingly faint, like a whisper fading into the wind. There was no grand exit, no dramatic farewell, just a quiet absence that left a hollow space where authority and arrogance once stood. He became a shadow, a reminder not of failure, but of transformation. To many, John's silent departure might have seemed like defeat. Yet, beneath the surface, it was a profound lesson unfolding. A lesson about the true nature of power, the necessity of truth, and the enduring pursuit of justice. Power, they say, can corrupt. But true power lies in humility, in the willingness to see beyond oneself, to confront uncomfortable truths, and to grow from them. John's journey from unquestioned enforcer to isolated reflection illustrates this beautifully. It reminds us that no system, no institution, is beyond change. Truth, as embodied by Lisa Grant and upheld by Michael Reed, is not always loud or confrontational. Sometimes it is quiet, persistent, and unwavering, like a steady flame that refuses to be extinguished. It teaches us that standing firm in our convictions, even in silence, can reshape the world around us. Justice is not a destination, but a path, one walked by many, sometimes alone, often with heavy steps. But every step, every act of courage, moves us closer to a society where respect and dignity are not privileges, but rights. John's story, though marked by mistakes and regrets, is ultimately a beacon of hope. It shows that systems can evolve, that people can change, and that the darkest moments can birth the brightest lights. As we reflect on this narrative, Let it inspire us to look inward, to examine our own biases, to question the status quo, and to stand for what is right, even when it is difficult. If this story moved you, if it sparked reflection or hope, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Join us as we explore stories of courage, change, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Together, we can learn, grow, and build a world where every voice matters. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your presence here is a step toward a brighter, more just future. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and until next time, keep standing strong.